Hey, what is up, everybody? Jeremy here. And guys, I'm very interested for the conversation we have today is we have Zack Schreier with us today from lifestacks.com. And we're going to be taking a look in-depth at health. And I think Zack has a very unique viewpoint, not just because of the type of products they put together, but also because he has a very unique health challenge himself, which has led him to looking at things very differently. So Zack, thanks for spending some time with me today, man.
Yeah, thank you. I'm really glad to be talking with you and your audience. Where do you want to start, Jeremy?
Well, I want to know a little bit about your background. I know you were on Shark Tank. You had another company previously called Quevos, and a lot of it had to do with health challenges that you were facing. So I'd love to hear, I guess, a little bit about, what those health challenges were and, how that led you to being an entrepreneur. It's very interesting because I think it's when you look at people that create great products and do really interesting things, a lot of times they're trying to solve their own problem. So I'd love to hear about that.
Yeah, awesome. Well, thanks for that intro. So yes, as you mentioned, I do have a special health problem, which is type 1 diabetes. I was diagnosed when I was 11 years old. And for members of the audience that aren't familiar with type 1, it's a pretty comprehensive and difficult disease to manage. So as I was leaving the hospital, my parents were reminding me about all the stuff that the nurses and doctors told me I had to do.
Hmm.
I said, do I really have to do that? So, for example, I was supposed to keep track of all the carbs I ate, keep a journal, write down all my blood sugars and all my injections. I said, this just seems like it's going to be overwhelming and constant. And they said,
Can
you
we real quick, Zack, just because
yeah,
I'm going to be honest with you. So
sure.
my father-in-law is a diabetic, and I still don't know the difference between type 1 and type 2. So could we just real quick go over what the difference between those two is, just at least just for my benefit? Because as I mentioned, I don't always get those two straight, so it's going to help me a little bit.
Yeah, of course. So basically, type 1 is an autoimmune disease where the insulin producing cells in your pancreas are attacked by your own body. And
Mm,
so what that ends up meaning is insulin, which is this hormone that shuttles glucose from your bloodstream into your cells, is basically no longer produced by the body in the same quantities. And
hmm.
that leads to a pooling of glucose in the blood.
Got it.
And so you don't get the energy from glucose during that period before you're on insulin therapy, and also glucose pools and creates these damaging byproducts. So you start to feel really, really crappy. So I lost about 30 pounds over the course of that month
Wow.
before my diagnosis. And I was already, I was 95 pounds and 5'1", and so I shrank. Type 2 is basically generally thought to be more lifestyle induced than type 1.
Okay.
Type 2 it's a similar problem with
So
insulin
that's like when
deficiency.
when people are like, they aren't eating well, they're eating too many different things, their body can turn into this. And whereas it sounds like the other is more of some sort of a like traumatic body event that creates it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Like my father-in-law, for example, he had a gallbladder issue, and it got so bad and taxed his body so bad that lo and behold, he became diabetic. So it's to me, it sounds like it's more of a traumatic body issue.
Yeah, exactly. It's deficiency of insulin. So you're still producing insulin,
Got it.
but for various reasons, including a lack of insulin sensitivity, you might not have enough insulin to control blood sugar, and so
Got it.
you'll have more sort of a severe blood sugar spikes and maybe energy problems as a result of that.
So you get out of the hospital, you have this new diagnosis, and you're trying to figure out like, what do I do with this? And now I understand all the rules of that too. So thank you for that. So like, I guess, how did you then approach that? And I guess what led you to then starting creating a product?
Sure. Yeah. So this was just sixth grade. So it's pretty overwhelming to be basically put in charge of my health like this.
Hmm.
Effectively, I had to play the role of my pancreas, at least on this insulin regulation side of
Yeah.
things. Um,
That can
I
be
basically,
tough too, Zach. 'Cause I feel like in some ways that can like, take your childhood a little bit too, because you got to figure out how to work around that. 'Cause I know like my 4-year-old, like I'm always trying to take like candy and stuff away from her. So like it's definitely got to change how you look at everything.
yes, it absolutely does. And basically, as soon as I was confronted with this, and my parents told me you have to take this seriously, it's no joke. Then I really dived in. So I started keeping a pretty exhaustive journal. I started doing experiments as well. So I was supposed to check my sugar 5 to 10 times a day, and I would check 20 or 25 times over the course of the morning just to get a really in-depth view of what was happening when I did different things. So I discovered things about activity, about even things as simple as chewing gum, for example.
That's really interesting. You took the approach of this as a science project.
exactly.
That's a very
And
Tim Ferriss approach. Okay, so which one of these things is going to affect my body more or less, or make no difference at all? That's really interesting. What did you find were some of the biggest things that maybe you realized were problems, didn't realize were problems? Like, what was that whole experience like?
yeah, I think it really comes down to the sort of mix of macronutrients in the food. That's the biggest thing for just how rapidly the sugar spikes.
Hmm.
So just for your audience, 100 carbs is going to have the same net effect on your glucose, but there's a difference in just how long it takes for your glucose to get saturated with those 100 carbs
Hmm.
as a result of the speed of digestion of
Got
the
it.
carbs. And so when you've got protein, when you got fiber and fat in the mix with those carbs, they're going to be slow absorbed. And essentially, that what that means is that the uptake of those carbs can be offset by insulin, and the longer it takes for those carbs to absorb, the more comprehensive that offset's going to be. So
Hmm.
instead of rapid spike and then a rapid decline, you'll have a smoother blood sugar post meal. So it
Mm.
really meal quality and macronutrient mix became pretty crucial.
Hmm.
And then a few years later, I took up running, and that brought with it its whole mix of challenges and learnings.
I can
And
imagine because that's very, like you need a lot of, glycogen and things like that to make that work. And if you're saying like, oh, well, carbohydrates and everything are affecting my blood sugar, affecting everything else, like that's kind of a problem. Like the thing you need, you may not be able to have enough of because it's going to spike your blood sugar.
right, exactly. It's worth saying type ones actually don't have to avoid carbs. So that it's keto is not like a forced move or anything for type
Okay.
ones. Um, but what you want to do is to keep sugar in check by offsetting the carbs you're having with the right amount of insulin. So that's kind of
Mm.
that's the game basically. And so as you mentioned, running is it basically expects the consumption of carbs in the body through glycogen. And so basically what I discovered was slower, lower intensity running would lead to increased insulin sensitivity and then uptake of glucose, use of glucose, so my sugar would drop rapidly. But harder running actually causes the release of adrenaline and cortisol, and that has basically the downstream effect of increasing the release of glucose into the bloodstream. So
Mm.
the liver takes stored glycogen and basically turns it into sugar, and then
Hmm.
that sugar sits in the blood waiting for insulin. And
Mm.
so there's this very strange thing where an easy run would cause me to drop precipitously, a hard run would cause me to rise quite a bit.
Mm.
So I could go from a regular blood sugar to 3x a regular blood sugar over the course of a hard training session, and then somewhere in between I would stay flat. Um,
That's
Now there's
interesting.
tons of variables
That's really
also.
interesting too, because I feel like you kind of need a middle ground between the two of those, right? Like, which is really, really interesting because you want to like intensity's good, but like it sounds like intensity was too much. But then if you brought it down to too low of a gradient, then that was also a bad thing too. So like, man, that's really kind of being forced to stick in the middle there, dude.
Yeah, it was a lot. But ultimately, and this is sort of a lesson that I've taken from running to other aspects of health and life.
Hmm.
Rather than allow the complication of the diabetes to restrict my actions, my behaviors, rather just learn to deal with how the diabetes ends up acting in my body and behave as I'd like to.
Yeah.
So you often hear diabetics recommended, for example, not to fast, and I'm certainly not recommending fasting to diabetics. I'm not a doctor, so I'm not making any medical
Yeah.
recommendations here.
Yeah.
Um,
This does not constitute medical advice, but we're going to talk about it anyway.
yeah, thank you. But you're told not to fast, and the reason
Hmm.
is that with your normal daily dose of insulin, if you're fasting, you might get low. But rather than restrict that entire set of health interventions, I'd rather just adjust my insulin intake.
Hmm.
So that was a lesson I learned with running. If I'm going to go for a long, slow run, I better have less active insulin in my body than I otherwise would.
Hmm.
If I'm going to go for a hard run, then I need to be thoughtful and preemptive about increasing my insulin the right amount.
Hmm.
So it's a balancing act. Now, similarly with fasting, um, a diabetic would blood sugar would just tank if you fasted with the same amount of active insulin,
Hmm.
but instead you can pull back that quantity of insulin and keep your sugar flat.
Hmm.
And the medical advice is really counterintuitive because fasting might be exactly the right thing for an insulin dependent, insulin sensitive, I'm sorry, insulin insensitive person
Hmm.
like a type 2 diabetic. Really, a lot of health experts right now are thinking that insulin and fasting insulin levels are pretty crucial to overall metabolic health over the long run. So basically the lesson is, instead of being limited, just figure out how to deal with doing the things you want to do.
That's
Diabetes definitely can help you
fascinating.
out.
Now here's the question this brings me to, because like once again, like I'm a former competitive power lifter. I don't quite do what I used to do, man. Like in my 20s, I was pulling 80,000 pound army tanks, deadlifting 700 pounds. Now I pulled 545 last week on a deadlift, so I was pretty happy with that. Like in my 30s, that's
Nice.
that's good for me. So,
Yeah.
but as
Wow.
as power lifters, we're always trying to chase like you know ATP, right? Adenine triphosphate. We're always trying to add more ATP to our Krebs cycle. So like that's the thing we're trying to figure out. I'm curious, and this may be like have nothing to do with it, but I'm sure this is something you've looked at because you're interested in experiments. Have you found that being diabetic has affected like that, like ATP uptake or anything like that?
Yeah, it's hard to say.
Okay.
At this point, I'm grateful that my energy levels are still very very good.
Mm-hmm.
So despite this hectic blood sugar fluctuation that I've had since for more than half my life,
Yeah.
I'm still thriving. And I think a lot of these health interventions are a piece of that. So
Sure.
fasting and running help to optimize metabolism, make you more efficient at utilizing energy and fat. And so I think that all that stuff is keeping me alive and healthy.
So let me ask you this then. How does nutraceuticals fit in this whole thing? Like, so that's what you're doing with LifeStack now is you're creating nutraceuticals, and I think first of all, I think the big confusion for people is number one, they don't know what a nutraceutical is, right? Like they think that like, oh, it's just a vitamin, right? So I guess how does this lifestyle challenge you've had and you've learned to work around and do more with, how does that kind of lead to nutraceuticals, and what are those?
Yeah, thanks so much for asking. So I guess I'll clarify nutraceuticals first, but then I want to sort of step back and talk about health habits in
Sure,
general, because nutraceuticals are sort of a part of that framework for
got it.
me. So nutraceuticals basically are bioactive compounds, generally from food, sometimes synthesized, and so people are more familiar with the term supplement,
Hmm.
and that's a pretty good analog to nutraceuticals. It's
Sure.
pretty much the same thing. So broadly, here's how we at LifeStacks think about health habits. Basically, various habits that you do today. So think of anything that you might do, whether it's coffee or lifting or a cold shower or getting enough sleep. Um, all these things are going to have an immediate impact on performance and the way that you feel. And
Hmm.
so, have your cup of coffee and you get more done, and you might feel sort of less tired and happier. Yeah, exactly.
I,
Uh,
I, I will tell you though, Zach. So in my 20s, I was a high school teacher for 2 years, in my early 20s, and I thought 9 periods a day meant I needed to drink 9 cups of coffee a day. You could imagine what a terrible person I was by 3 o'clock. So even
oh,
coffee can be a little
sure.
too much at times.
Totally. Yeah, exactly. So these interventions are definitely dose dependent. If you cold shower for 2 minutes, maybe norepinephrine spikes and you feel clear headed. If you do it for 10 minutes, maybe you feel overstressed,
Hmm.
or 20 or 30. And of course, the dose is also dependent on your experience. So maybe
Hmm.
you titrate up to 10 minutes or 15 or,
I've found
whatever
like
that dose is.
between 3 and 5 is kind of that good number for me for a cold shower. I feel like if I don't hit 3, it's not quite enough. If I hit more than 5, then I've like lost feeling and like my extremities at that point.
Totally, yeah. And I found doing that myself. I would get I'd be focused, but I would get a little stressed, antsy, and maybe a little more irritable if I was doing too much of a stressor like that. So anyways, yeah, that first category of like how you feel and how you perform right now as a result of the intervention.
Sure.
But then of course there's also the long-term health impacts of all the stuff that we're doing. So the question of coffee and longevity, or the question of cold showering and longevity. Um, and so just to take an example, like Adderall would make you feel really good today, but then of course you're going to have accumulating negative health impacts as a result of
Hmm.
that. And then the third sort of category, or the third sort of phase of health habits that I think usually we're not thinking about as much is the actual process and act of implementing or executing that health habit. And
Hmm.
so, and this is really crucial at LifeStacks. We think we want to adopt habits that make us feel good right now, help us live longer and healthier over the long run, and
Hmm.
then also that we enjoy including in our days.
Hmm.
And that means the habit's going to be stickier. It's going to be something that gives us energy rather than takes it away.
Yep.
So, think of mindfulness or think of yoga or climbing, various activities that people do that they really like including in their lifestyle.
Hmm.
That's the sort of thing that we want to introduce to people,
Okay,
more
so this
habits
is going
like
to be
that.
weird because like a lifestyle thing for me, and I do this every day. I did it a couple minutes early today because you and I started talking at 3 o'clock, but I do this every day at 3 o'clock. I have my cup of coffee in the afternoon, and my afternoon cup of coffee is different than my morning cup of coffee because in the middle of the day, I like a pour over cup of coffee because that's a longer process where you got to kind of move the pot around and everything else. And that in itself is a little bit calming, even creating the coffee. As weird as that is, but that's a lifestyle thing for me.
Totally, exactly. So you're tapping into that third thing,
Yeah.
which is just the fact that, in order to benefit from these health habits, we actually have to go and spend our time on them.
Hmm.
And so basically, Life Stacks is taking this sort of three-pronged approach to creating nutraceutical products.
Mm.
So the reason we got interested in supplements in the first place is those first two things, immediate performance and long-term benefits.
Hmm.
So instead of Adderall, we wanted a combination of nutraceuticals that would give us daily energy and cognitive health, but also support long-term health.
Yeah,
So
well,
instead
because
of become
that's why I'm not a big believer in things like Adderall and what's the other one they wanted to put me on when I was like 6. Gosh,
Ritalin,
Ritalin,
Vyvanse,
that's the one.
yeah,
Yeah, like
yeah.
I feel like that was much more prevalent when I was younger, and that was actually the reason I ended up in private school because my parents were like, "Yeah, we're not putting that in our kid," but because I think there are some benefits we can get from substances that are similar to that, but I think those substances are innately harmful. You know what I mean?
Yes, for sure, exactly. So we're interested in that category of bioactive ingredients or nutraceuticals that is both going to support performance right now and also over the long run. So
Yeah,
that was a crucial motivator for creating the products that we created. And then that third piece is also just the enjoyability of the consumption.
yeah.
So I think that's ignored pretty much across the board in the supplement space. To really create a ritual that we benefit from, it's great if it is also something we enjoy doing. And so we infuse nutraceuticals in delicious, intuitive food products.
Mm.
The first of which is an add to coffee. It's keto, it's vegan, it's MCT based.
Hmm.
MCT is a healthy fat, and it's infused with nutraceuticals that give you immediate energy and cognitive benefits, including like clarity and drive. But we've also selected ingredients that have been studied for their long-term health benefits.
Hmm.
So it's a product that you love taking, makes you feel great, and that you can feel really good about taking for your long-term health.
That's really interesting. And I may have to, after this call, I may have to hit you up about your MCT product. MCT is the thing I do every single morning. I don't know about you, but I usually, I've went through various different blenders because I found if you put it in a regular blender with your hot coffee, it tends to blow the lid off because of the heat expansion. But I use the stick blender now, and it works really well
Yep.
for putting my MCT in my coffee.
Yeah, same, for
So,
sure.
but I think that's something that's really interesting, and I think this is a lesson not just for people like in the health product space, but for in any product space. Is like when you're trying to get somebody to adopt something as part of their life as their lifestyle, it has to be something that number one they want to adopt to their lifestyle, and number two there has to be some benefit other than just what it's doing for them, right? Because like there's people talk about, and this is an extreme example, but people talk about coffee enemas and all the benefits you can get from coffee enemas. I don't know, man. That sounds like a really difficult thing to do that I don't want to make part of my lifestyle. I don't care how much it helps me. Like, so you have to think about, like, how much does it adapt to a lifestyle when you're thinking of a product, right?
Exactly. Yes, totally. We could spend our whole life doing health habits that we don't enjoy, but then what was it all for to stay healthy?
Yeah.
So really crucial. We're very focused on building a set of habits that we enjoy executing and that add energy to our days rather than require or take it away.
So I guess from that perspective, what things were you guys looking at that, you got really excited and were easy to adapt to lifestyle? What things, were maybe you guys excited about, but you're like, wow, this is actually really hard to adapt to lifestyle?
But that's a great question. Yeah. Well, I guess you know um, the consumables in general, I think people have an easy time with. But then we also explored the pill format. So creating a capsule or a tablet of the bioactives that we're interested in consuming,
Hmm.
and we know what benefits we're hoping to derive, and so we get excited about the immediate benefits and the long term benefits.
Yeah.
But there's more skepticism around that.
Well, you
what is
lose your
this thing?
bioavailability too, like when it's in that
That's true.
form, because your body has to pre-digest it in order to do anything with it, so it's not as bioly available.
Yeah, for sure. So for that reason, and just for the delightfulness of the consumption experience, we've chosen to go the route of food and food like products.
So I guess like looking at it then, Zach, and I think if you asked a lot of people because you're dealing with a health challenge, they wouldn't see this as healthy. But me talking to you with your wealth of knowledge and what we've talked about here, like, to me, you seem healthier than like 95% of people out there because you're just more mindful of it. So I guess when you look at it, how is your definition of like what you look at healthy as changed as you've gotten older?
Yeah, for sure. I think as a runner, I was thinking of health pretty much in terms of fitness. So what can
Yeah.
I do today? But the issue with that is that some of the what is this? James Cleary's Atomic Habits.
Yeah.
He talks about habit. Our I think he says our health is a trailing indicator of our habits.
Hmm.
So it takes time for what we're doing to show up and have sort of its net impact on our health.
Hmm.
So I've sort of shifted my mindset from thinking about health as just how fast can I run today to health as what am I putting into my body that's going to basically stay with me for the long haul and protect my capacity over the long term. So a sort of longer view of that. And I guess I'll say something in general about health here. Our view of health is that health is basically just capacity, enduring capacity. So it's the ability to do what's meaningful to do.
Yeah.
And so rather than viewing aging as this sort of this thing into itself, we can view it as a decline in health,
Sure.
the degradation of capacity. Um, and so this basically just comes down to an equation of the damage that you're incurring and the damage that you're offsetting. And
Mm.
so basically we want our health habits to mitigate damage as much as possible. So we avoid things like Adderall or like other sort of environmental toxins that are going to cause us to decay faster. And then we do things that are going to basically increase our resistance to decay. So these are we view this as coming in two categories.
Hmm.
One is basically components. So think of the RDAs that the FDA recommends, that your daily allowances of vitamin C and magnesium and whatnot.
They're
Um,
all bullshit though. Anyway, the RDAs.
yeah, they are. That's for sure. But what's not bullshit is the actual stuff that they're talking about. That
Hmm.
stuff is essential for long-term and short-term
Well,
function.
no, absolutely, but I just it's any. I don't think they're taking the right quantities into consideration. But that's neither here nor there.
Oh no, actually, yeah, totally. I totally agree. So I was going to mention this work by Bruce Ames
Hmm.
on longevity nutrition. So basically, what he's saying is that there's a couple different categories of compounds that your body's making. Some are necessary for acute or immediate functionality, and some are necessary for protecting the body over the long run.
Hmm.
And basically, evolution prioritizes this very moment because who knows which tiger you're going to get eaten by tomorrow. And so
Yeah.
it's basically, there's a what's called a discounting, a future discounting
Hmm.
that's implicit in evolutionary selection. What that means is your body's going to prefer to make these immediately necessary compounds over these long-term compounds.
Hmm.
And so the RDAs are set in a way where if you were not to have enough, or if you were not to meet the RDA, then you'd show immediate signs of deficiency.
Hmm.
But what that's not taking into account is the long-term deficiency that would you'd incur if you didn't get enough of these compounds and others.
Hmm.
So potentially, this amount of magnesium or vitamin C or zinc is enough for right now, but it's not enough for long-term health. And so you
Hmm.
see aging, and we think, oh, this is just natural decline, but potentially it's the result of pernicious accumulation or deficiency, basically. Um, uh, so then I'll add one other sort of consideration here,
Yeah.
which is that there's a whole set of compounds that are not recognized by the FDA as daily requirements, but they're nonetheless essential for long-term functionality. And this is something that Ames proposed. Maybe there's 25 RDAs, and then there's another 25 or so compounds that if you don't get enough of them, you will have your health decline faster.
Yeah.
So these are things like taurine, choline, carnitine, lipoic acid, and various compounds like that. And so all those are considered like longevity nutrients.
What
And
what
so that's
about
something.
what about beta alanine in high quantities? That makes me itch really bad.
Oh, interesting. Yeah, I don't. Yeah, I'd be interested. I guess this reminds me of nitric oxide considerations and
Yeah.
endothelium, but I don't know. I'm not
No,
sure about beta
it's but
alanine.
it's I took you off track there. But anyway, you're talking about the supplements. Like beta alanine is one that I use. I've always used as a pre-workout supplement. I've put it in a lot of different things, but it gets your skin warm. You add niacin to that too, and get your skin warm and it makes you itch a little bit. It's a little wild, but anyway, you were saying the other nutrients are.
Yeah, so basically we we love supplements because for really in terms of the long-term health benefits for these two reasons, they can provide components,
Hmm.
so including the RDAs, but also including these non-RDA nutritive components like taurine. And then the second reason is metabolic optimization. And so these are the reason I certain compounds can impact both of these things.
Yeah.
So carnitine might be a longevity nutrient, and it's also involved with immediate metabolic optimization.
Hmm.
But it's worth separating these categories because we can think of basically in terms of building blocks and then process.
Hmm.
And when we're thinking about process, as in metabolic optimization, this is where we start to view nutrition as kind of on the same playing field as things like fasting,
Hmm.
things like exercise, where what you have right now can basically contribute to your body's own health defense.
Hmm.
Sorry, I'm opening a
No, but
lot of
no, but
different
this is a
topics
really
here.
good point because like that, like for me, one of the reasons that I do like everybody's like you need a high amount of protein after a workout. Sure, for most people your body can't process more than 20 to 30 grams in a sitting. It's just how it is. But the thing they forget about, and they need to be either in a liquid or a powdered form because they need to be more easily digestible, is you also need to have your BCAAs after a workout too because they're also your aminos are the broken down blocks of your proteins, right? So you need those are available first, right? Because the body needs those right away, and then it needs the protein for longer recovery. So it's like you're saying, you're thinking of the thing you need right now, and you're also thinking of the longevity of it.
For sure. Yeah, totally. Yeah, that stuff with protein and mTOR is quite interesting too. In the BCAAs, we've looked into that somewhat. So yeah, so I guess I'll mention briefly. Uh, Supplements like ginseng and rhodiola really have their action on this metabolic optimization side of things.
Sure.
And so they're not, they're not essential parts of the diet. But
Right, but your brain function is going to be better with ginseng. Your energy level is going to be better with ginseng. Like if you don't have it, you're going to notice you don't have it.
Exactly, for sure. And what's interesting about many of these compounds, so if you think of David Sinclair's focus on NMN and resveratrol, people are also talking about pine bark and grapes and other proanthocyanidins. Basically, all these things are basically contributing to
They're for free
your resilience.
radicals, aren't they? Isn't that the point of those things? Is they're antioxidants?
Yeah, antioxidation is one piece of it, but then
Mm-hmm.
I think potentially even more important is the role that they have in signaling. So that
Okay.
they tell basically your stress response pathways to be active. So when you fast, when you go for a run, when you have resveratrol or some of these other polyphenols, basically they activate the part of your mitochondria, this AMPK pathway that makes you more resilient to stress, makes you
Mm-hmm.
better at creating energy efficiently in the long run.
So
So
that's
we're
really interesting because it seems like because of the adaptions you've had to make, you've noticed the other adaptions that we're making and we're not considering, and that's why you've added some of these certain things. Is that correct?
exactly totally. And we believe in stacking. We're life stacks.
Mm-hmm.
We think that you can get more potent signals by combining some of these things. And
Mm.
so Sinclair, for example, takes NMN, resveratrol, and then fasts all day. And so we're very much in the same spirit. We give you MCT as a fasting compatible fat. This stack of nutrients that are going to support immediate functioning and long-term metabolic health. And
Mm-hmm.
then, if that's your thing, we encourage you to fast with our stack, because then you'll get these benefits amplified.
Very cool. Well, Zach, I've really enjoyed this conversation, man. I think we covered a lot of different things, and I always enjoy a conversation I get to nerd out in, by the way, because it's very rare I get to do so. So for people listening, if they want to find out more about you and they want to find out more about LifeStack, where's going to be the best place to go?
Yeah. Well, thanks so much. I've enjoyed this too, Ryan, and sorry, Jeremy. And yeah, I love nerding out as well. So appreciate the time. Yeah, please check us out on lifestacks.com. Whether you're experienced faster or fasting curious, or just somebody interested in starting your day off on the right track with nutrients and potentially calorie deficit and focus, willpower, definitely try out our MCT product. And we'll be bringing more products to the market in the future too. So stay tuned. And then for your audience, Jeremy, we are doing a try it before you buy it offer. So you
Nice.
can go to lifestacks.com. That's spelled how it sounds, lifestacks, stacks.com. And basically just add the MCT to your cart. It will ship to you for free. And if you like it, you keep it and you buy it. And if you don't, you just send it back. We think the product really does help people and people love taking it. So we're confident enough in that we're willing to let you try it for free.
Very cool. And as I was saying to you before we started recording, I'm like, man, that means you really have faith in your products. I think that's a great thing, and I'm definitely excited for people to check this out. And as I mentioned, being an MCT nerd myself, I'll be checking this out as well. So, Zack Schreier, thank you so much for hanging out with me today, man.
Awesome. Thank you, Jeremy.